Imagine this. You're living what seems like the perfect life. A loving husband, a beautiful home, and a future that feels secure. But what if, in one shocking moment, everything you thought was true unraveled before your eyes? What if the person you trusted most, the one who vowed to love and protect you, was hiding a secret so devastating it could destroy everything you've built? This is the story of Emily Carter, a woman whose world was turned upside down when her husband's betrayal was exposed. But this isn't just a tale of heartbreak and deceit. It's a story of revenge, justice, and the unbreakable bond between siblings. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be on the edge of your seat, desperate to know how it all unfolds. Let's talk about trust for a moment. It's the foundation of every relationship, isn't it? We give it freely, believing that the people we love will honor it. But what happens when that trust is shattered? When the person you thought you knew better than anyone else reveals a side of themselves you never could have imagined? That's exactly what happened to Emily. She was blindsided, betrayed, and left questioning everything she thought she knew about her marriage. But here's the twist: Emily wasn't alone. She had someone in her corner who wasn't about to let her suffer in silence. Enter her brother, Daniel Carter, a self-made millionaire with a reputation for being ruthless in business and fiercely protective of his family. When Daniel discovered what had happened to his sister, he didn't just offer sympathy. He vowed to make her husband pay. And let me tell you, when a man like Daniel Carter makes a promise, he keeps it. Now I know what you're thinking. Revenge stories are a dime a dozen, right? But this one is different. This isn't just about getting even. It's about justice, about standing up for someone you love when they can't stand up for themselves. It's about the lengths we'll go to protect the people who matter most. And it's about the shocking twists and turns that no one could have seen coming. Because here's the thing, Emily's husband didn't just betray her. He crossed the wrong family. And Daniel? Well, he had a plan so calculated, so precise that it would leave everyone involved reeling. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning, because trust me, you're going to want to hear every detail. Emily and her husband, Jason, seemed like the perfect couple. High school sweethearts who had built a life together, they were the envy of their friends and family. Jason was charming, successful, and by all accounts, devoted to Emily. But as we all know, appearances can be deceiving. Behind closed doors, Jason was hiding a secret, one that would eventually come to light in the most dramatic way possible. It started with small things: late nights at work, unexplained absences, and a growing distance between him and Emily. At first, she brushed it off. Marriage is hard after all, and everyone goes through rough patches. But then came the phone call, the one that changed everything. A voice on the other end of the line, revealing a truth so shocking that Emily's world came crashing down. Jason had been living a double life, and the extent of his betrayal was beyond anything she could have imagined. But Emily wasn't the only one who was hurt. Her brother, Daniel, had always been protective of her. Growing up, he was the one who stood up for her, who made sure no one ever messed with his little sister. And now, as adults, that bond was stronger than ever. When Daniel found out what Jason had done, he was furious. But Daniel wasn't the type to act on emotion. No, he was a strategist, a man who knew how to play the long game. And he had a plan that would not only expose Jason's lies, but also ensure that he paid for what he'd done. But here's the thing, Daniel's plan wasn't just about revenge. It was about sending a message. A message that no one messes with the Carter family and gets away with it. As the story unfolds, you'll see just how far Daniel was willing to go to protect his sister. You'll meet the key players in this drama, from Jason's mistress to the private investigator Daniel hired to uncover the truth. You'll see the length Emily went to rebuild her life after the betrayal, and you'll witness the shocking moments that no one could have predicted. But most importantly, you'll see what happens when someone crosses a man like Daniel Carter. Because when it comes to family, there's no line he won't cross, no limit to what he'll do to make things right. So, why am I telling you all this? Because I know you've been in situations where you felt betrayed, where you've questioned the people you thought you could trust. and I know how much it hurts. But this story isn't just about the pain of betrayal. It's about the power of resilience, the strength of family, and the justice that comes when someone refuses to back down. It's a story that will make you angry, that will make you cheer, and that will leave you wondering what you would do in Emily's shoes. And by the end of this video, you'll have the answers you've been searching for. You'll see how it all played out, and you'll understand why this story has captivated everyone who's heard it. But before we dive into the details, I want you to think about something. Think about the people in your life who you would do anything for, the ones you would move heaven and earth to protect. Because that's what this story is really about. It's about love, loyalty, and the lengths we'll go to for the people we care about. And it's about the moment when everything changes, when the truth comes out, and there's no going back. So, are you ready to find out what happened? Are you ready to see how Emily's story ends? Because trust me, you're not going to want to miss this. Stick around, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Emily Carter's life had always been one of quiet stability, the kind of life that seemed unshakable until it wasn't. She and Jason had been together since they were teenagers. Their love story, the stuff of small-town legends. They met in high school, where Jason was the star quarterback, and Emily was the shy, artistic girl who caught his eye. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and by the time they graduated, they were inseparable. Jason was the kind of man who made promises and kept them, or so Emily thought. He promised her a future filled with love, security, and adventure. And for years, it seemed like he was delivering on that promise. They got married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by friends and family, bought a charming house in the suburbs, and even started talking about starting a family. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, cracks were beginning to form. Jason's late nights at work became more frequent, and his excuses grew flimsier. Emily tried to rationalize it. He was climbing the corporate ladder after all, and success required sacrifice. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the late nights. It was the way he avoided her questions, the way his phone buzzed incessantly, but he never answered it in front of her. She told herself she was being paranoid, that marriage was about trust, and she had no reason not to trust Jason. But then came the phone call. It was a woman's voice on the other end, calm but firm, delivering a truth that shattered Emily's world. Jason had been having an affair, not a fleeting fling, but a full-blown relationship with a woman named Vanessa, someone he had met at work. The details were gut-wrenching: secret vacations, expensive gifts, and even plans for a future together. Emily felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. How could the man she had loved for over a decade betray her so completely? When Emily confronted Jason, he didn't deny it. Instead, he seemed almost relieved, as if the weight of his secret had been too much to bear. He apologized, of course, but his words felt hollow, like he was reading from a script. He claimed it was a mistake, that he had gotten in over his head and didn't know how to get out. But Emily wasn't buying it. The man standing in front of her wasn't the Jason she knew, or maybe he was, and she had just been blind to who he really was all along. She kicked him out of the house that night, her heart breaking with every step he took toward the door. But even as she grappled with the pain of his betrayal, a small part of her felt a flicker of relief. At least now she knew the truth. At least now she could start to rebuild her life. What she didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. Enter Daniel Carter, Emily's older brother, and the one person she could always count on. Daniel was the kind of man who commanded respect wherever he went. A self-made millionaire with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, he had built his empire from the ground up, and he wasn't afraid to play dirty when the situation called for it. But beneath his tough exterior was a heart of gold, especially when it came to his family. When Daniel found out what Jason had done, he was livid. He had never been Jason's biggest fan. He always thought there was something off about the guy, but he had kept his opinions to himself because Emily was happy. Now, though, all bets were off. Daniel wasn't the type to sit back and let someone hurt his sister. He was going to make Jason pay, and he was going to do it in a way that would leave no doubt about who was in charge. Daniel's plan was meticulous, A carefully orchestrated series of moves designed to dismantle Jason's life piece by piece. He started by hiring a private investigator to dig into Jason's affairs, and what they uncovered was even worse than Emily had imagined. Jason hadn't just been cheating on her, he had been embezzling money from his company, funneling funds into offshore accounts, and living a double life that was far more elaborate than anyone could have guessed. But Daniel didn't stop there. He reached out to Vanessa, Jason's mistress, and what he learned from her added another layer of complexity to the story. Vanessa claimed she had no idea Jason was married, at least not at first. By the time she found out, she was in too deep, caught up in a web of lies and manipulation. She was just as much a victim as Emily, or so she said. Daniel wasn't sure he believed her, but he knew she could be useful. If Vanessa was willing to cooperate, she could help bring Jason down. And Daniel wasn't above using her to get what he wanted. As the pieces of Daniel's plan fell into place, Emily found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, she was grateful for her brother's support. She didn't know what she would have done without him. But on the other hand, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Daniel's methods were ruthless, and while she wanted justice, she wasn't sure she wanted it at any cost. She had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who tried to see the good in people even when they didn't deserve it. But this was different. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message, about making sure Jason understood the consequences of his actions. And as much as it pained her to admit it, she knew Daniel was right. Jason needed to pay. Meanwhile, Jason was starting to feel the heat. The private investigator's inquiries hadn't gone unnoticed, and he was growing increasingly paranoid. He knew Daniel was behind it, and he knew better than to underestimate him. But Jason wasn't about to go down without a fight. He had spent years building his life, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. Not Emily, not Daniel, and certainly not some private investigator. He began to cover his tracks, deleting emails, closing accounts, and doing whatever he could to stay one step ahead. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. And then there was Vanessa. She'd been acting strange lately, dodging his calls and avoiding his questions. He didn't know what she was up to, but he had a sinking feeling it wasn't good. As the tension between the characters reached a boiling point, new players began to enter the scene. There was Rachel, Emily's best friend and confidant, who had her own suspicions about Jason long before the truth came out. Rachel had always been the voice of reason in Emily's life, the one who wasn't afraid to tell her the hard truths. But even Rachel was shocked by the extent of Jason's betrayal, and she was determined to help Emily pick up the pieces. Then there was Mark, Daniel's right-hand man and the one person he trusted to help him execute his plan. Mark was loyal to a fault, but even he had his doubts about how far Daniel was willing to go. And finally, there was Claire, Jason's boss and the one person who could make or break his career. Claire had always been a wild card, and no one knew whose side she was really on. The stakes were higher than ever, and the lines between right and wrong were becoming increasingly blurred. Emily was torn between her desire for justice and her fear of what Daniel's revenge might cost. Jason was scrambling to save himself, but every move he made seemed to dig him deeper into trouble. And Daniel? He was playing a dangerous game, one that could have consequences he hadn't even considered. But one thing was certain, this story was far from over. The betrayal, the lies, the secrets, they were all leading to a showdown that no one could have predicted. And when the dust finally settled, nothing would ever be the same. So, what happens next? Stick around because the twists and turns are just getting started. You won't want to miss what's coming. The days turned into weeks. The tension between Emily, Daniel, and Jason reached a fever pitch. Emily found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, torn between her desire to move on and her need to see justice served. She had started seeing a therapist to help her process the betrayal, but no amount of counseling could erase the pain of Jason's lies. Meanwhile, Daniel's plan was in full swing, and the noose around Jason's neck was tightening with every passing day. The private investigator had uncovered even more damning evidence, including financial records that linked Jason to a series of shady business deals. Daniel knew this was the ammunition he needed to take Jason down, but he also knew he had to be careful. One wrong move and the whole thing could blow up in his face. But just when it seemed like Daniel had the upper hand, an unexpected twist threw everything into chaos. Vanessa, Jason's mistress, reached out to Emily with a shocking revelation. She claimed that Jason had been manipulating her from the very beginning, feeding her lies and using her as a pawn in his elaborate game. But that wasn't all. Vanessa also revealed that Jason had been involved in something much bigger, a scheme that went far beyond his affair and embezzlement. She didn't have all the details, but she knew enough to realize that Jason was in way over his head. And now, she was scared. Scared of what Jason might do if he found out she had talked. Scared of the people he was involved with. Scared for her life. Emily didn't know what to make of Vanessa's claims, but she couldn't ignore the fear in her voice. Was Jason capable of something even worse than betrayal? And if so, what did that mean for her and for Daniel? Daniel, ever the strategist, saw Vanessa's revelation as both a threat. If Jason was involved in something bigger, it could explain why he had been so desperate to cover his tracks. But it also meant that Daniel's plan had just gotten a lot more complicated. He couldn't afford to underestimate Jason, not when there were so many unknowns. He decided to dig deeper, enlisting Mark to help him uncover the truth. What they found was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Jason had been working with a powerful and dangerous group of individuals, people who didn't take kindly to being crossed. If Daniel wasn't careful, he could end up putting not just himself, but Emily and the rest of their family in danger. But Daniel wasn't the type to back down. If anything, the stakes being higher only made him more determined to see this through. Meanwhile, Jason was growing increasingly desperate. He knew Daniel was closing in and he could feel the walls closing in around him. But he wasn't about to go down without a fight. He began to reach out to his contacts, calling in favors and making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He even tried to manipulate Vanessa into staying quiet using a mix of charm and threats to keep her in line. But Vanessa was done playing his games. She had seen the real Jason, and she wasn't about to let him destroy her life any further. She started gathering evidence of her own, determined to protect herself no matter what. But as she dug deeper, she realized just how dangerous Jason's world really was. The people he was involved with weren't just powerful, they were ruthless. And if they found out she was talking, there was no telling what they might do. As the pieces of the puzzle began to come together, Emily found herself drawn deeper into the chaos. She had always been the kind of person who avoided conflict. But this was different. This was her life, her future, and she wasn't about to let Jason or anyone else take that away from her. She started working closely with Daniel, helping him piece together the evidence they needed to bring Jason down. But as they got closer to the truth, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. There was a piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit, a detail that didn't add up. And then it hit her. What if Jason wasn't the mastermind behind all of this? What if he was just a pawn in a much larger game? The realization sent a chill down Emily's spine. If Jason was just a pawn, then who was pulling the strings? And what did they want? She shared her suspicions with Daniel, who agreed that it was a possibility they couldn't ignore. But before they could dig any deeper, they received a warning, a thinly veiled threat that made it clear they were getting too close. Someone didn't want them to uncover the truth, and they were willing to do whatever it took to stop them. Daniel knew they were playing with fire, but he also knew they couldn't stop now. They were too close to the truth and the stakes were too high. But as the danger grew, so did the tension between Emily and Daniel. Emily wanted to protect her family, but Daniel was willing to risk everything to see this through. And that difference in their approaches was starting to drive a wedge between them. As the story hurtled toward its climax, the lines between right and wrong became increasingly blurred. Emily was forced to confront the harsh reality that justice might come at a cost she wasn't willing to pay. Daniel, on the other hand, was more determined than ever to see his plan through, no matter the consequences. And Jason? He was a man on the edge, desperate to save himself, but running out of options. The stage was set for a showdown that would change everything. But as the tension reached its peak, one question remained: who would come out on top? And at what cost? The answers were closer than anyone realized, but the road to get there was fraught with danger, betrayal, and unexpected twists. So, what happens next? Stick around, because the final act is about to begin, and you won't want to miss it. The final act of this gripping saga began with a confrontation that no one saw coming. Emily, Daniel, and Jason found themselves face to face in a tense, high-stakes meeting orchestrated by Daniel. He had lured Jason under the guise of a business deal, but the real purpose was far more personal. The room was charged with tension, the air thick with unspoken accusations and simmering rage. Emily stood by Daniel's side, her heart pounding as she looked at the man she once loved. Jason, for his part, tried to maintain his composure, but the cracks in his facade were beginning to show. He knew he was cornered, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. What he didn't know was that Daniel had one final card to play, a revelation that would change everything. Daniel calmly laid out the evidence he had gathered, piece by damning piece. The embezzlement, the offshore accounts, the affair, it was all there, laid bare for everyone to see. But then he dropped the bombshell. Jason wasn't just a cheater and a thief, he was also a pawn in a much larger scheme. The powerful individuals he had been working with weren't just business associates, they were part of a criminal network involved in money laundering and fraud. And Jason, in his greed and desperation, had become entangled in their web. The revelation hit Jason like a ton of bricks. He had always thought he was in control, but now he realized he had been used all along. His face paled as the weight of the truth settled over him. But Daniel wasn't done. He revealed that he had already tipped off the authorities, and they were on their way. Jason's world was about to come crashing down, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As the sound of sirens grew closer, Jason's bravado crumbled. He turned to Emily, pleading for her forgiveness, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She had loved him once, but that love had been shattered by his lies and betrayal. There was no going back, no fixing what he had broken. Emily's voice was steady as she told him that she was done with the lies, done with the pain, done with him. It was a moment of catharsis, a chance for her to reclaim her power and take control of her life. But just when it seemed like the story was reaching its conclusion, an unexpected twist changed everything. Vanessa, who had been quietly observing the confrontation, stepped forward with a USB drive in her hand. She handed it to Daniel, explaining that it contained evidence of Jason's dealings with the criminal network, evidence that could bring the entire operation down. The room fell silent as the implications of Vanessa's actions sank in. She had risked everything to do the right thing, and in doing so, she had given Daniel and Emily the leverage they needed to protect themselves and their family. But the danger wasn't over yet. The criminal network wasn't going to take this lying down, and they would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Daniel knew they had to act fast. He handed the USB drive to Mark, instructing him to deliver it to the authorities immediately. Then he turned to Emily and Vanessa, telling them to leave and go somewhere safe until the dust settled. Emily hesitated, torn between her desire to stay and fight and her need to protect herself. But in the end, she knew Daniel was right. This was bigger than any of them, and they couldn't afford to take any chances. As Emily and Vanessa left, Daniel stayed behind to face the fallout. The authorities arrived shortly after, arresting Jason and seizing the evidence. But the real battle was just beginning. The criminal network retaliated quickly, targeting Daniel and his business in an attempt to silence him. But Daniel was ready. He had anticipated their moves and had already put safeguards in place. With the help of Mark and a team of trusted allies, he managed to outmaneuver them at every turn. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, but in the end, Daniel emerged victorious. The network was dismantled, its leaders arrested, and Jason was left to face the consequences of his actions. It was a hard-fought victory, but one that came at a cost. Daniel's business took a hit, and he was forced to rebuild from the ground up. But he didn't regret it. For him, it was never about the money, it was about protecting his family and ensuring that justice was served. In the aftermath, Emily found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She had lost so much: her marriage, her trust, the life she had built with Jason. But she had also gained something invaluable: her freedom. She was no longer defined by Jason's betrayal or the pain he had caused her. She was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live life on her own terms. Vanessa, too, found a sense of closure. She had been a victim of Jason's manipulation, but she had also played a role in bringing him down. It was a bittersweet victory, but one that allowed her to move forward with her life. As for Daniel, he had proven once again that there was nothing he wouldn't do for his family. But he also realized that revenge, while satisfying, came with its own set of consequences. He had risked everything to protect Emily, and while he didn't regret it, he knew he couldn't keep living his life on the edge. It was time to focus on rebuilding not just his business, but his relationships and his sense of purpose. The story of Emily, Daniel, and Jason is one of betrayal, revenge, and redemption. It's a reminder that life is unpredictable, and the people we think we know can sometimes surprise us in the worst ways. But it's also a story of resilience, of the power of family, and the importance of standing up for what's right. As the dust settled and the characters moved on with their lives, one thing became clear: no matter how dark things may seem, there is always hope for a brighter future. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well. So, what's the takeaway from this incredible story? It's that no matter what life throws at you, you have the power to rise above it. You have the strength to rebuild, to heal, and to create a life that's truly your own. And that's a lesson worth remembering. Thanks for sticking with me until the end of this wild ride. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales like this one. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting for the life you deserve.